What's up, guys? Mr. Schaefer here. Number of the Stars. We're back at it. Um, Craziness in the last chapters, right? Um, so finally, it's time for them to go on their mission or their kind of plan they have, right, to get these Jews and Ellen's family to safety, right? They're trying to get them to Sweden. So Uncle Heinrich was meeting them on the boat. Peter and Mama took two groups to the water in the middle of the night. Um, and yeah, Anne Marie wakes up and realizes, oh my gosh, it's late and Mama's still not back. She looks out the window and boom, Mama's laying there on the ground. So she gets out there to her, realizes that she has a broken ankle. She fell on the way back home, had to crawl all the way back home, and then they're finally getting her back to the house. She sits on the porch and looks down, and Emily's like, "What's this?" It was the packet, bro. The packet that they needed to get to Heinrich, right? Mr. Rosen was supposed to take it to him, but he must have dropped it on the way out because he fell. So Anne Marie's mom was looking around like, this is all for nothing. We could have blown this whole thing. And Anne Marie says, I'll do it. I'll take it. I know the way. I'll take it. It's still almost time for them to go sailing. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll go. I can run fast. And that was the last thing. She said she took the packet, put it in a little box or a little basket, put some food and bread and apples and cheese on top, a napkin on top of it, so she could hide the packet in there. And that was my question with the last chapter. What do you think's in the packet? Like, something's got to be in that packet that is so important. But what is it? Hopefully we'll find out. And will she make it? I don't know. Let's see what the deal is. All right. So chapter 14, On the Dark Path. Here we go. Only now, entering the woods on the footpath, did Anne-Marie realize how cold the dawn was. She had watched and helped earlier as the others donned sweaters, jackets, and coats, and she had peered into the night, following them with her eyes as they moved silently off, bulky in their garments, blankets, and their arms. But she wore only a light sweater over her cotton dress. Through the October day, later, would be warmed by sunlight. Now it was gray, chilly, and damp. She shivered. Put yourself in her shoes, right? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Pure darkness and cold and being hunted by soldiers and trying to deliver this package. Like, she's your age, guys. She's 10 years old, right? Doing that. Brave, right? Crazy? A little bit of both, maybe? The path curved and she could no longer look behind her into the clearing for the farmhouse, outlined against the pale sky and the lightening meadow beyond. Now there were only dark woods ahead. Underfoot, the path, latticed with thick roots hidden under the fallen leaves, was invisible. She felt her way with her feet, trying not to stumble. The handle of the straw basket scratched her arm through her sweater. She shifted it and tried to run. She thought of a story she had often told to Kirsty as they cuddled in bed at night. Once upon a time there was a little girl, she told herself silently, who had a beautiful red cloak. Her mother had made it for her. She wore it so often that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. Kirsty would always interrupt there. Why is it called a Red Riding Hood? Kirsty would ask. Why didn't they just call her Little Red Cloak? Well, it had a hood that covered her head. She had beautiful curls like you, Kirsty. Maybe someday Mama will make you a coat with a hood to cover your curls and keep you warm. Well, why? Kirsty would ask. Why is it a riding hood? Was she riding a horse? Maybe she had a horse that she rode sometimes, but not in this story. Now stop interrupting every minute. Anne-Marie smiled, feeling her way through the dark, remembering how Kirsty always interrupted stories to ask questions. Often she wanted to make the story last longer. The story continued. One day the little girl's mother said, I want to take a basket of food to your grandmother. She's sick in bed. Come, let me tie your red cloak. The grandmother lived deep in the woods, didn't she? Kirsty would ask. In the dangerous woods where wolves lived. Anne-Marie heard a small noise. A squirrel, perhaps, or a rabbit, scampering nearby. She paused, stood still on the path, and smiled again. Kirsty would have been frightened. She would have grabbed Anne-Marie's hand and said, A wolf! But Anne-Marie knew that the woods were not like the woods in the story. There were no wolves or bears or tigers. None of the beasts that populated Kirsty's vivid imagination. She hurried on. So you get what she's doing? She's like thinking of stories with Kirsty and thinking about being in the woods and while she's running, right, or while she's going through here. Still, they were very dark, these woods. Anne Marie had followed this path in the dark before. She had told her mother she would run, and she tried. Here the path turned. She knew the turning well, though it seemed different in the dark. If she turned to the left, it would take her to the road, out where it would be lighter, wider, more traveled, but more dangerous too. Someone could see her on the road. At this time of dawn, other fishermen would be on the road, hurrying to their boats for the long day at sea, and there might be soldiers. She turned to the right and headed deeper into the woods. It was why Mama and Peter had needed to guide those who were strangers here, the Rosens and the others. A wrong turn would have taken them into danger. So Little Red Riding Hood carried the basket of food and hurried along through the woods. It was a lovely morning and birds were singing. Little Red Riding Hood sang too as she walked. Sometimes she changed that part of the story, telling it to Kirsty. Sometimes it was raining or even snowing in the woods. Sometimes it was evening with long, frightening shadows, so that Kirsty, listening, would snuggle closer and wrap her arms around Anne Marie. But now, telling it to herself, she wanted sunlight and birdsong. Here the path widened and flattened. It was a place where the woods opened on one side, and the path curved beside a meadow at the edge of the sea. Here she could run, and she did. Here, in daylight, there would be cows in the meadow, and in summer afternoons Anne Marie would always stop by the fence and hold out handfuls of grass, which the curious cows would take in with their gruff tongues. Here, her mother had told her, Mama would always stop too, as a child walking to school. Her dog, Trophus, would wriggle under the fence and run about the meadow, barking excitedly, trying to chase the cows, who always ignored him. The meadow was empty now, and colorless in half-light. She would hear the churning sea, sure, she could hear the churning sea beyond, and see the wash of daylight to the east, over Sweden. She ran as fast as she could, searching with her eyes for the place ahead where the path would re-enter the woods in its final segment, which led to town. Here the bushes were overgrown, and it was difficult to see the path here. But she found the entrance, beside the high blueberry bushes. How often she'd stop here in late summer to pick a handful of sweet berries. Her hands and mouth would be blue afterward, and Mama always laughed when she came home. Now it was dark again, as the trees and bushes closed around her, and she moved more slowly, though she still tried to run. Anne Marie thought of Mama, her ankle so swollen, her face so pained. She hoped Mama had called the doctor by now. The local doctor was an old man, brusque and businesslike, though with kind eyes. He had come to a farmhouse several times during the summers of the past, his battered car noisy on the dirt road. He had come once when Kirsty, a tiny baby then, had been sick and wailing with an earache, and he had come when Lisa spilled hot grease cooking breakfast and burned her hand. Anne Marie turned again as the path divided once more. The left fork would take her directly to the village. It was the way they had come from the train, and the way Mama had walked to school as a girl. But Anne Marie turned to the right, heading now toward the harbor side, where the fishing boats lay at anchor. She had often come this way before, too, sometimes at the end of the afternoon, to pick up the Ingeborg, Uncle Heinrich's boat, for the many returning, and to watch him and his helpers unload the day's catch of slippery, shimmering herring to still flopping in their containers. Even now, with the boats in the harbor ahead, empty of fish, preparing to leave for the day's fishing, she could smell the oily, salty scent of herring, which always remained in the air here. Herring is like a little tiny silverfish. It wasn't far now, and it was getting lighter. She ran almost as fast as she had run at school in the Friday foot races. Almost as fast as she had run down the Copenhagen sidewalk on the day the soldier had stopped her with his call of halt. Anne Marie continued the story in her head. Suddenly, as Little Red Riding Hood walked through the woods, she heard a noise. She heard a rustling in the bushes. A wolf! Kirsty would say, shivering in fearful delight. I know it's going to be a wolf. Emery always tried to prolong this part, to build up suspense and tantalize her sister. She didn't know what it was. She stopped on the path and listened. Something was following her in the bushes. Little Red Riding Hood was very, very, very frightened. She would stop, would stay silent for a moment, and beside her in the bed she could feel Kirsty holding her breath. Then Anne Marie would go on in a low, dread-filled voice. She heard a growl. Anne Marie stopped suddenly and stood on the path. There was a turn immediately ahead. Beyond it, she knew, as soon as she rounded the turn, she would see the landscape open to the sea. The woods would be behind her there, and ahead of her would be the harbor, the docks, and the countless fishing boats. Very soon it would be noisy there, with engines starting, fishermen calling to one another, and the gulls crying. But she had heard something else. She heard bushes rustling ahead. She heard footsteps, and she was certain it wasn't her imagination. She heard a low growl. Cautiously, she stepped forward, and another. She approached the turn in the path, and the noises continued. There they were, in front of her, 4 armed soldiers. With them, straining at taut leashes, were 2 large dogs, their eyes glittering, their lips curled. Of course, soldiers, there, right in the path of where she's going. Unbelievable. Is it unbelievable? Are you surprised? Not really surprised, are you? I know you're not. Alright, sorry, I'm just flustered right now. That's crazy, right? That's absolutely crazy. And look at the next chapter. My dogs smell meat. Alright, I'm stopping with this recording right now. We'll let this soak in, and we'll get to the next part.